Mr. Jones.
The United States is at war, again, drawn into battle against Japan and Germany by the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Breakfast in bed before,
But you won't have it there anymore.
Americans are not ready for war. Yet the countries of occupied Europe and Asia are looking to the troops of the United States to help secure their freedom. Now, a diverse and sometimes divided nation must build up forces large enough and strong enough to liberate millions. More than 3 million American men are drafted into the armed forces during 1942. Many are unfit for duty. The military improves their lives. Army dentists pull 15 million decaying teeth. Opticians issue 2 million pairs of glasses. 1 million recruits are taught to read and write. Those that can, write home regularly. Harold Clark to his mother.
Dear Blanche, well, I'm in the Army now and definitely behind the 8 ball. I don't like it, and it doesn't like me. So everything is lovely.
Larry Kane writes to his wife Grace in New York from his camp on the American West Coast.
Dearest Gracie, read that address and weep. I couldn't be much farther away from you and still be in the country. The prospects for seeing each other before a long time has elapsed is very slim. Please don't worry about me. All my love, Larry.
At home, the U.S. must overcome racial, social, and class divisions to turn the nation's industrial might towards building weapons of war. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
This production of ours in the United States must be raised far above present levels, even though it will mean the dislocation of the lives and occupations of millions of our own people.
The United States not only needs to arm and equip its own troops, it must support its allies, Britain and the Soviet Union, already staggering under the onslaught of Nazi Germany. If America is to succeed, it must mobilize the energy and resources of the nation towards one end, victory. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt.
At the present time, it is of paramount importance that the women and girls of our country be given training so that they may do their share in the war emergency.
Women and black Americans are about to receive opportunities they have always been denied. Phyllis Johnson, factory worker.
This is my chance for more pay. Gosh, I get sick of sticking around home. Ma and Pa keep treating me like a baby. Now I'll be on my own, and I can send more money home to them, too.
Over the next 3 years, 16 million men will go through basic training. Keith Winston to his wife.
Today we were learning how to use the bayonet and hand grenade. God, can you picture me putting a bayonet through another man? But they tell us over and over again, if we don't, they'll do it to us.
An enthusiastic Lieutenant Gus Fallon to his bartender friend in New York.
Dear Eddie, I love being a paratrooper. I love to raid the enemy, capture an airport, blow up a railroad terminal. I hope to surround a whole German regiment someday with maybe 20 enlisted men loaded with Tommy guns. Your sky-jumping pal, Gus.
Despite the need for able bodies, the military excludes some parts of American society. Homosexuals are unwelcome, but gay men and lesbians join up anyway and often serve with distinction. The military is also reluctant to accept black soldiers. The diary of Secretary of War Henry Stimson.
The Army has adopted rigid requirements for literacy, mainly to keep down the number of colored troops.
The black Americans who do get into the military mostly serve as laborers and never leave the United States. Less than 5% see combat. A soldier writing to the Richmond Afro-American.
We are proud to serve, but we want to serve in a more important capacity. We can and would fight if trained to do so, but as yet we hardly know that a gun or a tank, combat plans, a hand grenade, machine gun look like. We are referred to on this post as that nigger squadron at the end of the field.
Sunday, April 19th. This Sunday has been a day of many developments on many war fronts. In the fighting in the Philippines, outnumbered American and Filipino forces are still resisting the Japanese invaders on the islands of Cebu and Panay.
The war in the Pacific feeds racial hatred across the United States. For some Americans, patriotism is defined by race. Burt Miller, the Attorney General of Idaho.
We want to keep this a white man's country. All Japanese should be put in concentration camps.
In the spring of 1942, 110,000 Japanese-born and Japanese-American citizens living along America's west coast are forcibly relocated to internment camps. They abandon or sell their homes and property for huge losses, leaving behind most of their personal belongings. The Diary of James O'Meara.
Has the Gestapo come to America? Have we not risen in righteous anger at Hitler's mistreatment of Jews? Then is it not incongruous that citizens of Japanese descent should be similarly mistreated and prosecuted?
A black academic, Professor J. Saunders Redding, writing in the magazine American Mercury.
I do not like the constant references to the Japs as yellow bastards and yellow monkeys, as if color had something to do with treachery, as if color were the issue. The issue is plain. The issue simply is freedom.
October 1942. America practices for its first assault on Hitler's empire. Preparations for Operation Torch, an Allied invasion of North Africa, reveal an army and navy disorganized and poorly trained. Trial runs for the invasion leave landing craft and soldiers scattered up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States, miles off target. Major General Ernie Harmon.
If they can't find an objective in peaceful Chesapeake Bay, how are they going to find an objective in darkness on a foreign shore and under conditions of war?
Ready or not, the largest overseas landing force yet assembled leaves for North Africa. For almost every American on board, officer and soldier alike, this will be the first time they have ever been shot at by an enemy. November the 8th, 1942. Led by the British and Americans, Allied troops land near Casablanca and in Algeria. The American landings are chaotic and disorganized. Many troops hit the beach after daybreak, hours late and in full view of the defending forces. Lieutenant Robert Lewin writes to his mother.
The day we landed was pretty exciting. My boat got lost. Finally, we hit the beach and lo and behold, everyone who had landed before us is standing around and smoking and laughing. There hadn't been any opposition on the beach. Then it came. Guns opened on us, screaming shell fragments careening around. We dive into holes, and I get covered in camel dung.
the Allies quickly established footholds in the major port cities of North Africa. But Nazi planes bomb Allied positions daily. U.S. Army nurse Eugenia Rutkowski.
We disembarked and were quartered in large tents in a bivouac area. Suddenly, all hell broke loose. Alert alarms were blasting, planes droning above, and anti-aircraft guns bombarding the sky. Talk about being scared. I sure was. A British voice guided me to a bunker. He offered me a chair, a glass of wine, and a view. I needed that drink of wine. I could not believe this introduction to war.
Tanks and men move eastward towards the mountains of Tunisia, where the German army is dug in with tanks and heavy artillery. The action is captured by Hollywood film producer Darryl Zanuck.
Life out here is very elemental. You cannot wash or shave as frequently as you'd like, but somehow it doesn't seem to matter. You live under tension. This is no rehearsal. You are playing for keeps. A modern battle is not at all what most people imagine it to be. There actually is no front line. The action is fluid. One of your own columns may lunge forward on one flank, while a few miles away the enemy may have a pocket of his own that is behind. You rarely see the enemy tanks and our own tanks at one time. They do not rush at each other like a pair of knights on horseback. It is a strategic cat-and-mouse game.
The Allied advance bogs down in the mountains of Tunisia. U.S. war correspondent Ernie Pyle for the Scripps Howard News Service.
Our army is a green army, and most of our troops are in battle for the first time against seasoned troops. We simply didn't have enough stuff to knock out the Germans instantly. The going will be tough and probably long before we have cleaned up Africa and are ready to move to bigger fronts.
Eric Golub to his wife in Brooklyn.
You were telling me about hearing an all-Beethoven program which included the Fifth Piano Concerto. That's my favorite. I don't know what I'd give to be able to hear it. You'd be surprised how starved one can become for things like that.
January 1943. President Roosevelt arrives in liberated Casablanca in North Africa for a meeting of top American and British officials. Roosevelt is the first American president since Abraham Lincoln to visit U.S. troops in the field. Although Britain and the United States are allies, the two countries have different strategies for conducting the war. FDR's advisors favor an early invasion of occupied France. Britain's Winston Churchill wants to knock out Hitler's Italian ally first. Churchill prevails. But it is at Casablanca that Roosevelt first defines America's war aims: the unconditional surrender of Germany, Italy, and Japan. He later tells Congress,
"We mean no harm to the common people of the Axis nations, but we do mean to impose punishment and retribution in full upon their guilty, barbaric leaders. In other words, on the uncompromising terms of unconditional surrender."
At home, Americans are faced with rationing and restrictions.
The most important news for Americans today was made on the home front. Eric Severide reporting.
Afternoon tomorrow, anybody in the 17 eastern states and the District of Columbia who uses his car for pleasure driving will be violating the law.
Rationing for gasoline is imposed to save rubber used for tires. The Meadow Gold Dairy goes back to using horse-drawn wagons for their daily home milk deliveries. 20 million people grow their own food. Every family is encouraged to plant a victory garden. $8 million mouths in the armed services have to be fed daily, and the United States is shipping thousands of tons of food to Great Britain and to the Soviet Union. Men leaving for the military create a labor shortage on the farm. Women begin filling the gap. 1.5 million sign up for the Women's Land Army, leaving the cities for jobs on the farm. A Michigan woman quoted in the New York Times,
"My fiancé was killed in this war, and I feel perhaps that I, by helping to produce the food so vitally needed by our soldiers, can in part make up for the loss of at least one fighting man."
Leslie Tresham.
It was with a feeling of pride and uncertainty that I started my day as a farm helper. When the last ear of corn tumbled out of the wagon, I was so relieved. As I swung the empty wagon alongside the picker, the farmer shouted, "Have any trouble?" "Not a bit," I lied. "It was easy. I get tired, but so does that boy in the foxhole."
American bomber crews have been in England since mid-1942. The first targets are railroad yards and light industrial plants in France. The small size of the US bombing force means the first raids are ineffective but provide valuable lessons. Many crews keep diaries. James Verinis, co-pilot.
Hardly got to bed when they got us up. We're finally off on our first mission.
Bill Winchell, waist gunner.
91st Bomb Group starts her trip along the Glory Road. During the run over the target, everyone was keyed up, nervous, and excited. Naturally, our first taste of combat.
Much damage to target, but not completely destroyed. Home to base, tired but mighty happy. All ships returned.
The ship, the squadron, and the group came through with no casualties.
After their very next mission, the men have a change of attitude. Seen here, James Verinis, a co-pilot.
Holes were appearing in the plane all around us, and one directly beneath me. Altitude good for effective bombing, but well near suicide for us.
Bill Winchell.
It seemed as if every flak gun in Germany was there to meet us. Our ship came out of it with 40 holes, and we were fortunate compared to some. When it was all over, we were convinced that war can be hell.
In the winter of 1942, 3 out of every 4 crew members of the U.S. 8th Air Force are seriously injured, captured, or killed. In psychiatric sessions using sodium pentothal, the so-called truth serum, air crews relive their trauma.
Flak! 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 Fighters! Fighters! I was scared, Doc. I was yellow, Doc. All you do is sit and wait. There's nothing to do, Doc. You just sit and wait.
There's a fire in the bomb bay. Fire! Fire! Get me out of here! Come back, you rats! My parachute is stuck! They all ran away. I'm alone. I'll blow up with a ship. There won't be a piece left. Not one little piece.
Did you ever see a fellow without a head, Doc? A friend of yours without a head? He was my best buddy. I loved him. I ate with him, and I slept with him, and we played cards together, and we went out with girls together. Those goddamn Nazi bastards. I gotta go back and get those Nazi bastards. I want to kill them one by one.
Love and lust are great distractions from the dangers of war. Martin Bishop to his parents in Colorado.
The other night, I had to help censor the enlisted men's mail. Boy, what those guys don't write. One of the fellows wrote a girl in London how much he cared for her, and the next letter I picked up was to the same fellow's wife. Another fellow wrote to 3 different girls telling them how much he loves them, etc. I really got a kick out of it.
Not everyone takes such a light-hearted view. Chaplain Frith writes to his church superiors,
"There is absolutely no end to the vulgar business of soldiers making love, or should I say lust, in public places. The soldiers confessed the reason they had thrown away all propriety was that they were away from home, where no one knew them.
Joan went out with a Yank. They bore me. All they talk about is themselves, with just enough breaks now and then to say, 'Gee, I like your legs,' or 'How far is your camp from here, honey?' Makes you sick."
But many soldiers, faced with the possibility of death, want to make a commitment to a future. Romance turns serious, and more than 70,000 GIs take British war brides. Wives left at home in the United States worry about losing their men to either German guns or to British beauties. Frances Field tells her husband in a letter,
"The question in every wife's heart, will he want to come back to me? He would have gone on loving me if he had stayed at home. Wouldn't have known anything different. But now, who knows?"
The war is transforming American lives and expectations. 1 out of every 5 Americans moves to a new state, many seeking employment in the defense industry. Frances Field.
Housing is a problem, and there is talk of commandeering spare rooms in private homes for war workers. Domestic help is suddenly non-existent, and certain folks are learning how to wash their own dishes.
John Mullin writes to his son Jack, stationed in England.
San Francisco is overrun by Okies, Arkies, Codyes, etc., increased the population by 100,000. Market Street is overcrowded with women in slacks and Negroes. The former Japanese section is crowded with them.
Japanese Americans who used to live along the west coast of the United States have now spent more than a year in internment camps. Fumi Kagawa writes from Heart Mountain, Wyoming, to her friends in Mountain View, California.
Our first impression of this camp was one of despair. There is a lot of loose dirt and dust. The water is not very good. In order to keep ourselves warm and comfortable, we had to stay in bed all day.
More than 100,000 Japanese Americans spend the entire war in the internment camps. Velma Berryman, a white nurse working at Hart Mountain, views the Japanese nurses around her with suspicion. She writes to her future husband,
"It's cold tonight and the wind is howling around the end of the wards. One of the nurses just wrote my name in Japanese. Perhaps I should show it to the FBI. How do I know she isn't writing something different? Honey, good night. Love, Velma."
Angered at the slur of being labeled disloyal, 12,000 young men volunteer for the all-Japanese American 442nd Infantry Regiment. Some join straight from the internment camps. One volunteer writes,
"I am of Japanese ancestry, but by all rights of birth an American. But some people have referred to me as a Jap. Why can Americans consider us true Americans like they are? Why should they have such terrible race prejudice? In the First World War, Americans of German ancestry fought against Germany. The 442nd would rather fight the Japs than the Germans to prove our loyalty."
The 442nd fights in Italy. The regiment earns more than 18,000 individual medals, the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. The American workforce is changing. A shipyard supervisor.
"See those girls running the 40-ton overhead cranes? They are the best workers I have ever had, men or women."
By 1943, nearly 2 million women are working in defense plants around the country. Helen Black.
"It's no picnic, but someone has to do the work. The dust from the aluminum gets in your skin, and unless you wash carefully, it stays in."
Many work two jobs, homemaker and factory worker.
"I'm doing a heavy job at home and in the factory. When I'm not at the plant, I do the cleaning and cooking and marketing and all our washing. I don't feel so good anymore."
By law, defense plants must offer jobs regardless of race. Black American Leotha Hackshaw breaks the color barrier when she takes a job in an all-white factory.
The company itself, I soon learned, had no Negroes in its employ. Shortly after I arrived, a Negro matron was installed, followed by other Negro girls in the assembly line. If anyone expected a riot between the white girls and the incoming Negro girls, they must have been disappointed. The company workers were very friendly to me.
But wildcat hate strikes are not uncommon, as white workers feel threatened by the influx of black workers into previously all-white jobs.
Governor Kelly of Michigan has ordered martial law in Detroit, where race riots have killed 11 men and injured more than 500 since last midnight. Martial law will take effect at 10 p.m. Eastern Wartime.
The racial tension in the country is reflected in the military. The U.S. Army Air Forces train 1,000 black aviators at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. The men are segregated into an all-black unit. Colonel Noel Parrish, training commander of the 99th Fighter Squadron, tells them at graduation,
"You are fighting men now. You have made the team. Your future as fighting men will depend on how determined you are not to give satisfaction to those who would like to see you fail."
At first shunned by white pilots, the Tuskegee Airmen are eventually assigned to escort bombers on raids over Sicily, Italy, and Germany. As fighter escorts, they never lose a single bomber to enemy fire. But most African Americans are still relegated to segregated work details. Private Bert Barbero writes from Camp Berkeley in Texas.
"It was to my amazement to observe a sign in the latrine, actually segregating a section of the latrine for Negro soldiers, the other being used by the German prisoners and the white soldiers. Seeing this was honestly disheartening. It made me feel, here, the tyrant is actually placed over the liberator."
A black officer writes,
"The men of my race naturally turn to me, a commissioned officer, to explain the reasons and policies of the government. What am I to say? Am I to admit that we are fighting for ideals for another country or people when America has yet to establish these ideals at home?"
May 1943.
The North African campaign is finished, and the Allies have won a great victory. For the first time in 3½ years of war, the Axis powers are wholly on the defensive, pushed back in the European continent, and nervously wondering where the next Allied blow will fall.
The human cost of victory. Allied casualties, 70,000. German and Italian, 75,000. 250,000 German and Italian soldiers are taken prisoner. Reporter Ernie Pyle.
No longer do I have any doubts that we shall win. Despite our strikes and bickering and confusion back home, America is producing, and no one can deny that. Apparently, it takes a country like America about 2 years to become wholly at war. We've changed our character and become a war nation.
For the first time, American women play a prominent role in uniform. 350,000 women serve in all branches of the military. Military commanders find women are more productive in their jobs and less likely to be disciplinary problems than men. Some women worry they will lose their newly found freedoms and opportunities in uniform and out when their husbands, sons, and brothers return after the war. Journalist Susan B. Anthony II.
After this war, the way it was after the last war, it will be the same old story of no job, no dough, no hope. Why should I leave home today, take training for a job, when they'll just kick me out tomorrow when the war is over?
With most of America's male pilots away serving in Europe or the Pacific, the Women Air Force Service Pilots is formed. It trains women in delivering military aircraft, ferrying troops, and test flying new planes. Alberta Pasquin is one of the first WASPs and shoots color home movies for her sister Chick.
Hi. Last night we all hung around the rec hall until 8:30. All the girls dancing together and others just making as much noise as possible. It is the grandest fun. Still say I'd rather have a lot of men around, but the novelty of the thing is amazing. I feel very much like a lost soul. No letters, no love, no liquor.
Caro Bailey writes home.
Dear Mommy, they seem to have every minute of the day from 6 to 10 all planned out. Ground school, etc. The major said if we had a minute to ourselves, he had slipped up on something. What with all this air, wind, and sun, and physical training, and drilling, and sleep, can't wait to get healthy looking like the rest. Most of the girls are practically beautiful. Went to a watermelon party that the USO had. By the time Ellie, Sammy, and Caroline and I had got through the first piece, the party had turned into a watermelon splash. Had my shoes off and my whole face in the melon.
Over 1,000 women earn their pilot's wings. Alberta Pasquin.
Do I ever rave about flying? That it is so wonderful? Actually, it flew me around more than I flew it, but I must say that even that is enjoyable.
Marion Stegman.
Dearest Mother, the gods must envy me. This is just too to be true. Oh God, how I love it. Honestly, Mother, you haven't lived until you get way up there, all alone, Just you and that big, beautiful plane humming under your control. I just sit there and sing at the top of my lungs while I'm climbing up to 4,000 feet.
Towing targets fired at with live ammunition and test flying planes is dangerous. 38 wasps die in the line of duty. July 1943, Operation Husky. The last stepping stone to the European continent. 160,000 Allied troops leave North Africa and head for the shores of Sicily. Lieutenant Randall Harris writes to his Air Force buddy, Benjamin Thompson.
Dear Benji, I was in the first wave to hit the beach. My CO was killed, and at the same time I got hit. There was no pain to it. I kept thinking that if I was hit very bad, I would feel my shoes fill up with blood, but felt no signs, so I kept going. I looked and was surprised to find a big gob of guts sticking out about 2 inches above my Peter. So I sprinkled sulfa drugs on it, took the internal pills, and put on a bandage.
It takes 38 days to sweep through Sicily. 60,000 German troops are pushed back to the Italian peninsula at a cost of 31,000 Allied casualties. With the troops ready to invade Italy, the once gung-ho paratrooper Gus Fallon is still writing to his bartender friend.
Well, old-timer, we've only had a month of it in Sicily, but I had my belly full. I don't want to be a hero. Don't want any medals. Just want this darn war to end so we can all go home and live a peaceful life. Your paratrooper buddy, Gus.
In the summer of 1943, Jan Karski, a courier from the Polish government in exile, arrives in Washington, D.C. He brings an eyewitness account of what is happening to Jews in German-occupied Poland. Inside the Warsaw Ghetto, a German propaganda unit films in color. Jan Karski.
It was indescribable. Misery, death, disintegration, poverty, hunger, dirt. I saw 2 boys, Hitler Youth, playing with their guns, shooting, firing mindlessly. It was awful.
Karski gives his report to Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. Frankfurter, the son of Austrian Jews, tells him,
Mr. Karski, a man like me talking to a man like you must be totally frank. So I must say, I am unable to believe you.
Karski tells President Roosevelt,
More than 1,800,000 Jews have been murdered in my country. If there is no effort at Allied intervention, whether through reprisals or other action, within a year and a half of the time I left the homeland, the Jewish people of Poland will cease to exist.
By the end of the war, 90% of Poland's Jews, more than 3 million people, have been killed. July 1943. The Allies knowingly wage war on Germany's civilian population. British bombers hit military and civilian targets in Hamburg with incendiary bombs. They create a firestorm. Chet Huntley reports for CBS Radio.
Experts of the United States Army Air Forces had some things to say about the bombing of Hamburg today. They called it the first example of the complete use of air power and the pattern of the devastation to be extended to other German cities. It was not a terror operation, as has been suggested in some quarters. The Germans were rebuilding very quickly after the attacks. To prevent that at Hamburg, the homes of the workers, the stores, the buildings, even the very streets had to be demolished.
The RAF reports that 40,000 people died from the bombing. In Eastern Europe, the peasants of Yugoslavia and Albania are suffering under fascist occupation. Armed resistance groups operate in the mountains. U.S. Colonel Lynn Farish runs guns and supplies to the partisans, one of the main resistance groups inside Yugoslavia. The partisans help Allied flyers shot down on bombing raids escape from the Germans. Farish works for the OSS, America's first overseas intelligence agency. He is America's link to the leader of the partisans, Yugoslavian communist Josip Broz Tito. Farish reports,
"The partisan movement is of far greater military and political importance than is commonly realized in the outside world. The average partisan is very sympathetic to the USA and is steadfast in his belief that we will come to their aid."
The resistance groups in Yugoslavia create a political dilemma for the Allies. Tito's partisans and another Allied-supported resistance group, the Chetniks, often fight with each other. Colonel Farish reports the Chetniks sometimes collaborate with the Germans in attacks on the partisans.
The deep-rooted causes of the strife are contained in racial, religious, and political disputation. Is this the shape of things to come? Are we sacrificing to end this war only to have dozens of little wars spring up?
February 1944. The Allies set out to cripple Germany's aircraft industry and the Luftwaffe before the planned invasion of Western Europe. In 1 week, British and American bomber crews fly more than 6,000 missions. They drop 18,000 tons of bombs on Germany. The Luftwaffe loses more than a third of its planes. The Allies now have air superiority in Europe. B-17 pilot Louis LaHood.
The 8th Air Force is certainly going all out for the Luftwaffe. Guess they want to knock out the fighters before the invasion starts. I wish the darned invasion will start. This is getting darned old. I want to go home.
Britain has become an island fortress. 2 million Allied troops are ready and waiting. Larry Kane.
The first thing we got when we got off the boat was a speech of welcome which told us briefly and unequivocally why we're here. We're here to invade the continent.
All of the turmoil, struggle, and sacrifice of the past 2 years has brought the United States to the brink of a decisive moment in history. At first reluctant to fight, America is now poised to join the final assault on Hitler's fascist empire.
This nation, in the past 2 years, has become an active partner in the world's greatest war against human slavery. In this war, we have been compelled to learn how interdependent upon each other are all groups and sections of the whole population of America. There is only one front. When we speak of our total effort, we speak of the factory and the field and the mine, as well as the battlefield. We speak of the soldier and the civilian, the citizen and his government. Each and every one of us has a solemn obligation under God to serve this nation in its most critical hour, to keep this nation great, to make this nation greater in a better world.
June 1944. On the southern English coast, troops begin loading into landing craft for a 6-hour journey across the English Channel, bound for the coast of France. Red Cross worker Gisela Simon to her family.
Dear folks, we are anxiously awaiting the invasion, just as you are. We have worked in close contact with the combat forces who will make the first assault when it comes off. Pray for them. They will need it. I shiver when I think of the boys who won't come back.
Lieutenant Tracy Sugarman scribbles his wife June a note before boarding.
Hope this gets to you. It'll be the last word from me for a long time. Don't worry. I'm absolutely squared away for anything that may come my way. For this wonderful peace of mind, I have you to thank, Junie. Bye for a little, Angel. Remember, I love you with all my heart.